18th chapter and 17th chapter are quite similar, both at the same time. Pool that money and invest it in different securities. That is what both a mutual fund and a CIS typically does. So CIS includes any scheme or arrangement. Whether that scheme is registered or unregistered, it doesn't matter. If it is registered, it can have any corpus. Corpus basically refers to the total money collected, or you can also call it as the total money pooled in by the different investors. And if you register with SEBI, and if you're unregistered also, and if you have a corpus of more than 100 crores, then you are also considered to be a CIS, even if you are unregistered. So CIS is one of those funds or schemes which, in spite of being unregistered, will still come under the purview of SEBI regulation. This scheme or this particular entity pools funds for a common objective, and all the investors who have invested in this particular scheme, they will receive a share of the profits, of the income, of the property or the produce that you're getting from that particular CIS. In addition to this, this particular scheme is managed by a person who is called as CIMC, Collective Investment Management Company. So collective investment schemes, the investors themselves will not make the investment decision. The investment decision is made on behalf of such investors. And since the investors themselves don't manage it, they have an external manager for the fund. That is another special feature, and investors don't have any control over the fund management. That is taken care by this CIMC. If a scheme satisfies all these conditions, then it is considered to be a CIS. And there are other schemes which also have these features, where people pool money, where people share profits, where the fund is managed on behalf of the investors, and the investors don't have control over fund management, like any scheme offered by a cooperative society, any NBFC which accepts deposits from its investors. There also you invest money and you get some share of profits. If you invest in an insurance contract, you get a share of the property or income. In a PF scheme, you pool money for a common objective and the fund is managed on your behalf by your employer. If you deposit money with a company, whether you're a member or whether you're part of the public, the company will give you a share of its profits as interest. Same thing works with Nidhi company. Same thing happens in a chit fund. If you pool money together, there is some common objective in a chit fund scheme also. And in a mutual fund also something like that happens, and any other central government scheme also typically pools money and the investors get a share of profits. But all of these are not a CIS. So these entities are not a CIS. Any entity apart from a cooperative society scheme, an NBFC deposit, an insurance contract, a PF scheme, a company deposit, a Nidhi company deposit, a chit fund, a mutual fund or a central government notified scheme, you may end up pooling the money. You may end up receiving share of profits. You may not have any control over the management of the business, but still you will not be considered a CIS. A CIS is any scheme apart from these particular schemes. That is what is so special with respect to a CIS. The property that is managed by this scheme will be called as collective investment scheme property. Wherever you invest money, that money will be used to buy a property. And if the scheme is buying a property, they are buying it on your behalf. So this property includes the various deposits where the CIS would have invested your money indirectly, any income, any investments that this scheme has made on your behalf. All such things become the collective investment scheme's property. This CIS also typically is created in the form of a trust. And whenever there is a trust, there will be a trustee. This trustee will take care of the management of the CIS, and they will help in launching different schemes. So a CIS need not have one scheme. It can have multiple schemes of its own. And each scheme might have a different objective. One scheme focuses on income generation. Another scheme focuses on capital appreciation. Another scheme may focus on real estate. Another scheme may focus on debt market. So all these different schemes of CIS is all managed by the CIMC. And the CIS itself, as well as the CIMC, cannot invest in its own schemes because their job is to manage the scheme. Management of schemes is CIMC's job. Management of the trust is the trustee's job. And trustee will end up appointing the CIMC. That is the relationship between these different entities here. As a collective investment management company, you also should ensure that you are managing the funds properly. You are also doing due diligence before investing the other people's money. You are also considered responsible for all the acts that is done by the CIMC. You also have to appoint intermediaries just like every other chapter, both primary and secondary market intermediaries. You also have to give receipts for all the money that you have accepted. And you have to also ensure that board meeting once every 3 months. Just like a company, you are also a collective investment management company. So it is your job to also have board meetings once every 3 months. And you should ensure that your officers do not misuse the power that is being given to them. And you also have to obtain insurance for all the investments that you're doing and all the property that you are buying on behalf of the investors. You have to ensure that you obtain sufficient insurance to secure the money that is being invested by this CIS. If you don't do these things, then the penal provisions will be attracted. Penalty ranges from suspension of your certificate of registration. It includes criminal prosecution. SEBI can initiate that on the CIMC. You also should ensure that you only collect the money that is required for operation of the scheme. You cannot dispose any property that is collective investment scheme property without the approval of the trustee. You also should ensure that if any money is not utilized, you refund the money on time. If you don't do any of these, then you will be required to pay a penalty to SEBI, which they will decide, which can obviously range from 1 lakh per day to 1 crore, which we have already seen before. And if it's a UTP or FTP, then 25 times the profits made, or 25 crore rupees, or 3 times the profit made, whichever is higher. So that is what CISs are all about. CISs and CIMCs, basically their structure, what business they do, what type of activity are they allowed to perform, etc., is what is relevant from this chapter. Also, one more thing to notice, CIMC is a company, so you can only do CIS business. So this CIMC is a company registered under Companies Act. That CIS which has created you will be considered as a trust. This trust will have a sponsor, will have a trustee, and it will also have you. So typically sponsors will appoint and elect the trustees. Trustee will appoint and elect the CIMC, and all these three people will function together as a trust. This trust will float different schemes, and that scheme will be managed by the CIMC. And that is what this chapter is all about. Alright. Similar to this is the chapter on mutual funds also. So mutual funds also has similar entities involved. And initially we had also done a few numeric problems discussing generally what these mutual funds basically are. So they follow a very similar structure to what these CISs typically follow. So that is going to be our chapter 17. Mutual fund also are a trust. Here also there are schemes and arrangements. They also pool money from investors. Once the money is pooled, typically the investor will initially be approached by the mutual fund. They will pool in the money or invest the money in this particular mutual fund through the fund manager. That fund manager for CIMC was Collective Investment Management Company in the previous chapter. But for a mutual fund, they are called as a AMC. AMC means Asset Management Company. This is also a company. So an investor will invest his money through the AMC. This AMC will then invest the money in securities. The total money collected is once again called as the corpus. This securities is the mutual fund property. In the previous chapter, we had seen this to be the collective investment scheme property. This security that you have invested in will generate some returns, some income, or some profits. This profit should then be given back to the investor as a dividend. Collectively, the total money invested is called corpus, but individually, this money that you are pooling in will be divided into units, or also called as mutual fund units. In CIS, it is called as CIS units. So the terminology remains the same. And for this units itself, you typically end up finding out a different valuation based on their net asset value. So you compute NAV, and these units are initially sold for the very first time like an IPO by this particular mutual fund. That IPO is now called as NFO, or a new fund offer. Just like any other entity, mutual fund will also be set up in the form of a trust. This trust will have a sponsor. Sponsor will then appoint the trustee. Trustee will then appoint the AMC, and AMC will then appoint the intermediaries, which we have studied earlier in the subject. So similar structure to a CIS, and all the securities will then be kept with the custodian, who is also an intermediary. He will take care of all the mutual fund property. So sponsor will also have to invest capital into this mutual fund based on certain percentages. The trustee will then manage the operations, whichever day-to-day operations the mutual fund has. The AMC will be the fund manager. They will decide where to invest, what to invest. Custodian will keep the assets safe, and other intermediaries will assist the mutual fund in ensuring that your money is kept safe. This mutual fund can be divided on the basis of maturity into different categories, or on the basis of objective in different categories. On the basis of maturity, you have open-ended and close-ended funds, which means that their maturity period is going to be fixed. You will only get your money back after that maturity period, and they can be redeemed only on maturity. Whereas an open-ended fund, they can be purchased as well as redeemed at any time. So they are extremely flexible if they are a open-ended mutual fund. Therefore, they will have very high levels of liquidity. And if you want to purchase a close-ended fund, you can only buy them at the new fund offering, which I just talked about earlier, which is like the IPO for mutual funds. On the basis of objectives, just like the CIS, there could be multiple schemes. Scheme 1, Scheme 2, Scheme 3, Scheme 4. Each mutual fund and its fund manager, who's the AMC, might have decided a different objective for their particular scheme. So some of them are income-oriented schemes. Some of them are growth-oriented. Some of them are called as equity-linked saving schemes. which are for tax saving purposes. If you invest in these schemes, that money can be deducted as a deduction from your total income under Section 80C. Some schemes focus on capital appreciation. Some schemes focuses on real estate. So there can be n number of schemes based on objective. But based on maturity, there are only two types of mutual fund schemes, open and close-ended. CISs are always close-ended, whereas mutual fund can be either open or close-ended. Sometimes you can even have hybrid schemes. Hybrid scheme will combine the features of both income and growth schemes. There will be some fixed income. There will also be some capital appreciation. Then you have high growth schemes, which provide too much growth, which is an advanced version of a growth scheme. And you have tax saving schemes like ELSS. And then some schemes want to give you more safety, so they will be called as capital protection oriented schemes. Because everybody doesn't want to take risks. So for such people, you have capital protection oriented schemes. If all this money is invested in different securities, so all this money will be invested in equity shares, preference shares, debentures, bonds, government securities of different entities. And if these entities are in India, then they are called as onshore funds. And if they are outside India, then they are called as offshore funds. Those are the different type of schemes on the basis of where the scheme is getting the money to invest in. So the destination of your investment, if it is an Indian company equity shares, Indian company debentures, then it's an onshore mutual fund scheme. But if they take your money and invest in Google, Microsoft, and companies outside India, then they are called as an offshore mutual fund scheme, typically. So these are some data relating to mutual funds. If this mutual fund typically borrows money, then such funds are called as leveraged funds. They invest borrowed funds on another person's behalf. That is what these schemes typically do. And if a fund invests in another mutual fund, then it is called as a fund of funds. So mutual fund 1 takes the money, and rather than appointing a serious fund manager, they invest the money in mutual fund 2. That mutual fund 1 will be called as a fund of funds. If a mutual fund only invests in money market, then they are called as money market mutual funds. They don't invest in capital markets at all. If a mutual fund only invests in the debt market, then they are called as debt funds. So this is how mutual funds typically work. So all in all, a mutual fund will have different entities involved. You have a sponsor, who is the creator of the trust. Then you have the trustee, who manages the day-to-day operation. Then you have the AMC, which manages the fund, which is your fund manager. Then you have intermediaries, out of which you have custodian, who takes care of the safe custody of the mutual fund property. You also need the help of depositories like NSDL and CDSL because these are online transactions. You also need the help of registrar and share transfer agent for processing all these investments. The investors themselves, who are a critical part of this fund, they are sometimes called as the unit holders because they hold units of the particular mutual fund. And this sponsor has an obligation to invest 40% of the net worth of the AMC will be personally the money invested by the sponsor. So he is the creator of the trust. He will only appoint the trustee who will in turn appoint the AMC, but he also invests directly in the AMC. AMC will invest all of our money depending on the fund objective, and trustee will take care of day-to-day administration and operation. Unit holders are the investors of the mutual fund. So these investors, depending on the type of fund they are, will be larger or smaller in number. And this entire trust is what is called as a mutual fund. So just like a CIS, mutual funds are also typically a trust, but sometimes CISs can be LLP or sometimes even a partnership. So it can be a LLP, company, or a partnership, or a trust, or a body corporate. But a mutual fund will never be any of these. Mutual fund will always be a trust. That is another special feature that these mutual funds typically have. Now, everybody would have typically heard of this systematic investment plan that different mutual funds have. So we have to talk a little bit about this, which is called as SIP. Instead of investing once in a mutual fund, if you regularly invest a fixed amount at a fixed interval from time to time, which is a recurring investment, such an investment is called as a systematic investment plan. One second, please. Take, let's say $1,000, and you invest it for, let's say, every month. And let's say that mutual fund gives you a return on investment of, let's say, 8%. So for 25 years, if you just do an average of 1,000 rupees per month, you would only have an investment of 3 lakhs because 1,000 into 12 is 12,000 into 25 years is 3 lakhs. But once this SIP system is followed, this compounds your return and you will have approximately 9.57 lakhs in your hands at the end of 25 years if you go through the SIP route, approximately. Because every month you get the compounding effect of the 8% average ROI that you are having. The value at which you invest every month will also change. So the very first time you invest in an IPO of a mutual fund, which is an NFO, typically they'll give you an NAV of 10 rupees per unit. But over a period of time, this 10 rupees will become 12, 13, and as the scheme appreciates in value, the NAV keeps going up. So NAV is nothing but the total value of the investments that the mutual fund has made minus the expenses that it has incurred divided by the total units that are outstanding. So let's say you have 1,000 investors who have invested 1,000 rupees in a mutual fund initially. That gives you a total of 10 lakh rupees. The AMC is being given, let's say, 1 lakh rupees as its salary for the year. So 9 lakh. 10 lakh is the corpus, 1 lakh is the expenses, 9 lakh is the investable fund. This 9 lakh you invest in different companies and you end up earning, let's say, 20% returns in 1 year. 20% of 9 lakh would be 1,80,000. This is your total scheme earnings. The total money invested is 9 lakhs. So now the new corpus, that is the total value of your investments, is 10,80,000. And let's say you gave all these investors 10 rupee units. So you issued 1 lakh 10 rupee units for each of these investors. So let's say you have 1 lakh units remaining. If you divide it by 1 lakh, 10 rupees 80 paisa becomes your NAV. Your initial NAV was 10 lakh by 1 lakh, which was rupees 10. Now your new NAV is 10 rupees 80 paisa. Next year, let's say you make another payment of salary now. Your funds are 10,80,000 rupees. This year also you have to pay 1 lakh rupees as the salary. So your remaining investable funds are 9,80,000. This year you made only 18% returns. So 18% of 9,80,000, which was the money invested. Let's find out how much that is. So 9,80,000 into 18% is 1,76,400. So you have 1,76,400. Now you have the total corpus available, 11,56,400. The new NAV for year 2 will be 11,56,400 divided by 1 lakh units that you have. So that is going to be 11.56 rupees per unit. So if somebody wants to sell, let's say 1,000 units this year, you will have to pay them 11,560 rupees. They would have invested only 10,000. They got a return of 11,560. But next year, the third year, now you have paid them 11,560. You had total 11,56,400 minus you paid 11,560. Let's find out how much money is left. You have 11,44,840. Third year, the fund manager wants a salary hike of 20%, let's say. So you were paying 1 lakh, now you are paying 1,20,000 as your expenses. So now you're left with 1144,840 minus 1,20,000, which is 10,24,840. This is the money that is your investable funds. This year you make good returns of 22%, let's say, in year 3. So on 10,24,840, you get 22% return, 2,25,465 is the year 3 return. Plus 10,24,840 gives you 12,50,304. Let's say 305. This is your year 3 total value of investments, which means you will now have to calculate new NAV for year 3. So 12,50,305. You might think you will divide by 1 lakh, but the answer is no, because last year already somebody sold 1,000 units. So you only have 99,000 units remaining. 12,50,304 by 99,000 is your answer. So your new NAV is 12.63. This is how a typical mutual fund problem will look like. Are you guys able to follow this? Is this clear? Any doubts in this? If you want, I can redo the same. All right. So whatever expenses that we are charging every year, 1 lakh, and first year also it was 1 lakh. So that is the total annual fee that is charged by the AMC to manage our funds. So you also have what is called as the expense ratio. Expense ratio is the annual fees charged by this particular mutual fund to manage your money on your behalf. That is what is your expense ratio. This typically includes things like, AMC fees, intermediary fees, commission paid, service tax, etc. And then if they charge certain percentage of your expenses in the front end, that is called as the front end load. So expense ratio, if you have to express it in a formula, expenses into 100 divided by NAV of the first year plus NAV at the starting point, that is 0 by 2. So which is called average NAV. So expenses by average NAV into 100 is your expense ratio. And if you have to find out formulas for front end and back end load, front end load formula is NAV by 1 minus FEL, which is equal to your purchase price. You can represent front end load like this, and for back end load the formula will be, because you will be charged this at the redemption time, the formula is NAV by 1 plus back end load, which is equal to your redemption price. Remember, redemption price for this person was 11.656. So if you have to calculate his back end load, you can calculate it using this formula. These are typically your problems. I'll also send you a practice sheet which you can follow for numerical problems with respect to this particular subject. And one more formula you can remember is holding period return, HPR, which basically means income, the total income that you have earned, plus the difference between the end period value or value at the end of the period minus original value. This is in the numerator, divided by the original value into 100. This is holding period return. An income could be interest, dividend, or any other income that you are generating from this particular mutual fund. That is what typically the income from a fund will look like. What are some of the advantages of investing in both of these funds, that is mutual fund or CIS? One is they are professionally managed, so they have good fund managers who will give you good returns without you having to spend a lot of time. They have the advantage of diversification. They can diversify your portfolio and investments. Then administration is very convenient because you'll get SMS alerts and you get regular updates from time to time. There is good return potential compared to investing in an FD or any other particular form of traditional investment. The costs and the front and back end load are typically low with the data that they are going to share with you at all point of time. So if you have any doubts and clarifications, you can always get in touch with them. But there are some disadvantages too. Concentration is on only famous companies or blue chip companies also, which are part of your top companies. They sometimes might not perform well, so you might end up getting lower returns. Planning sometimes can be poor from certain fund managers, so you might get below average returns. Sometimes commission and brokerage percentages for some funds are very high, so you have to be careful before you select which mutual fund you are investing your money in. And there are obviously many risks associated with funds also. The risks can be of many types. You typically have controllable and uncontrollable risk. First is volatility risk. The risk that certain microeconomic factors like company performance, which affect the price of the securities. If any risk is associated due to that, that is called as a volatility risk. Then you have credit risk. Credit risk usually arises when you invest in low credit rated securities. So higher the credit rating, the lower the credit risk, and the lower the credit rating, the higher the credit risk. So they are inversely proportional. Will you get your money back? That is what credit risk is all about. The third type of risk is liquidity risk. Some mutual funds like ELSS, they have very low liquidity because you cannot redeem those funds on time. They take a lot of time for redemption because they are locked in for 2-3 years many times. So you can't get your money urgently. That is one disadvantage with certain mutual funds. Sometimes you have concentrated risk because you concentrate only in one particular sector. Let's say you only invest in pharmaceutical companies or banking sector. Such a risk which arises due to high concentration in one sector. Such a risk is called as a concentration risk. Then you also have the last one, which is your inflation risk, which is pretty much uncontrollable. This is due to macroeconomic factors. There is a lot of inflation in your country. Purchasing power reduces, and you don't have the same value for your money over a period of time. That creates an inflation risk. These are some of the risks that are associated with any investment, especially mutual fund. Apart from this, every AMC should ensure that the sponsor does not have more than 10% of their personal money invested in the trustee or the AMC. We've already seen the sponsor should invest 40% of net worth in AMC. But once you have done that, once you have set up the AMC, any further investment in the trustee or the AMC beyond 10% is not allowed. That is another important point that any mutual fund should remember, and the common points that we have learned for other chapters. That is the 5 common defaults should not apply to the sponsor also. Sponsor should not be debarred from capital markets. Sponsor should not have any pending litigation, etc. Those 5 common defaults apply to the sponsor as well as the trustee. You have to be a little extra careful. And once you set up the trustee will appoint the AMC. AMC will then appoint the intermediaries eventually. Now, once you are ready, you can start a new fund offering, which is like the IPO for mutual funds. But for NFO, you always require in principle approval from stock exchanges, which you have studied in ICDR regulations before. And same process as IPO will be followed for NFO also. So that is what you need to remember with respect to a particular mutual fund. Questions or queries from this chapter? Now, once the class gets over, I'll share this document that I'm writing on your group so that you can